Welcome to the American Diversity Report, where we interview innovative change makers and diverse people who make a difference in this world. I'm Deborah Levine, editor and your host today, and with me is Bea Franklin. She is almost 99 years young and inspirational, the daughter of the Pep Boys and wife of a World War II photographer. She is a breast cancer survivor and is still quite busy going on cruises, attending Broadway shows, and upscale New York City events. Welcome, Bea.
Thank you.
It's
Happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to hear from you. You have so many incredible stories to tell us over the years. But let's start out with having you tell the audience a little bit about who you are, where you began.
I was born in Philadelphia, and we lived in Philadelphia until I was 9. When we moved to New York, my father moved his business to New York, and we lived in Forest Hills for about 12 years when I met my husband and married my husband and lived in Jamaica Estates for about 6 years, and then we moved here to Lawrence.
And yes, I understand that you went to New York University, like I did.
Yes, I did. I went to NYU and graduated in 1946. I had started college at the University of Wisconsin, and due to illness there, I was suggested that I not go back to Wisconsin. So that's when I transferred to NYU, but I lost a year of credits, so that instead of graduating in 45, I graduated in 46.
And what did you study?
I beg your pardon?
What did you study?
I studied journalism. I thought I would be a writer or a reporter. Or I wasn't sure what it was going to be, but I studied journalism. But I never got to do it because I became pregnant my senior year, and that was the end of my career.
Oh, well, I'll share with you that I ended up at NYU also because I'd been ill at Harvard, and I went back, stayed with my parents in Long Island, Great Neck, Long Island, and finished at NYU. And I became a writer, partly because, well, I became many things, just as you have seen many things. We get to do a lot of things in this life, don't we?
Yes, we do. And it's an interesting life.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about the gentleman that you married.
Well, he came home from the war in October 1945, and he had a best buddy who I had a weekend date with. We were going to go to a football game on Saturday. No, it wasn't that. We were going out on a date to go dancing on a Saturday evening, and his best buddy said, "Why don't you get a date and we'll make it a double date?" Which is, they said fine, and the Thursday before that Saturday, Jerry, my husband, came to the house and said, "We'd like to go to see a show. What shows would you like to see?" And since I had seen, there weren't that many shows on Broadway as there are now, so, but I had seen all of the ones that were on Broadway. So I said, "Oh, anyone that you would like to see is fine with me." That was the whole conversation, which took place maybe 5 minutes. But as he walked out of the house, and I watched, because we had a long walkway from the front door to the sidewalk. So I watched him walking away, and something popped in my head. You're going to marry him. And I thought, that's strange to think because I barely know him. But he's that Friday before the Saturday we were going to go to a dance, he rang my doorbell and said, I just happened to be passing your house in my brother-in-law's car. I have to pick up something. Would you like to go for a ride? So I said, oh, that would be fine, because I really did want to get to know him better. So we spent the time and small talk, dropped me back off at home. And Saturday night, we went out to, there was a hotel that had music for dancing and dinner. So we were sitting at the table. Jerry had a date, and I was with his friend Oscar. And the music started, and Jerry was sitting opposite me. And he got up, he walked around behind his date and said to me, would you like to have this dance? And well, I wasn't going to pass up a good opportunity. So I said, oh, sure. So we danced the whole set, and we went back to the table and we were chatting. And my date, I think, was fuming because he had sent me a beautiful orchid to wear that night, and I wasn't dancing with him. And the same thing happened when the band came back to play again. Walked around, came to me, would you like to have this dance? And I said yes. And in between the two sets, Jerry's date got up from the table and she said, I'm going to the ladies' restroom. Would you like to join me? Which I never, ever did when I was out. But I said, okay. So we walk into the ladies' room, and the first thing she said was, you really like Jerry, don't you? And I said, yes, I do. She says, I don't mind if you spend the night, dancing with him, which was very generous of her, because my date was not about to get up and dance with a girl he didn't know. So that was the lovely thing. And then Sunday, I had a date with Oscar. It was a weekend date to go to the Giants football game and then go out for dinner. So Jerry, the temple I belonged to at the time, had a set of tickets to the game for veterans mainly. So Jerry was able to get a ticket, but he was sitting on the opposite side of the stadium. And the interesting thing is, when Oscar was driving back to Forest Hills, because in those days you didn't go to a football game and then go right out to dinner. You had to change your clothes for dinner. So Oscar was driving and I was sitting in the middle and Jerry was to my right. And Oscar was driving with one hand and his arm was around my shoulder. And Jerry, who was sitting next to me, was holding my right hand. It was a very interesting situation.
Mine, no, mine. Let me ask you this. Jerry was a photographer during World War II. Tell us a little bit about some of the photos that he took.
I have 2 albums filled with, because when he came home, when he left the army and came back home, he had an envelope filled with photos that he had taken for the Signal Corps, is the group that he was with. And he said to me, would you like to put these in an album? I said, of course I'll do that. And some of them are beautiful because when I moved into a new area, if there was an empty castle or an empty home or whatever, and some of the homes were beautiful, he would take a picture of those places. And he really had a talent for getting just the right view of the home, beautiful homes that were abandoned, I assume, by Jewish people who had fled the area. And so he had a talent for that kind of photography. And he had no experience as a photographer before the war. He worked for a company that developed pictures of important people, but that's the only experience he had with photography. And when he joined the army, because he enlisted in the army, they asked him what he did and what he could do, and he said, well, he told them about the photography end of it. And so they said, well, we're going to make a photographer out of you, which is what they did. Went for training in Dallas, Texas, I think it was. And then they shipped him over to North Africa.
Oh,
And that's when he started taking pictures.
what was it like for him to take the pictures of Dachau, the death camp?
The war pictures, some of them are horrible. And he never wanted to look at them. He never looked in the album after I made it. And I
Oh,
made 2 albums. He just couldn't. And he rarely talked about the war. In fact, one night we were sleeping, and all of a sudden I felt somebody on top of me. And I look up and I the fist in my face, and I said, Jerry, wake up. And he said, I'm sorry, I had a very bad dream and I didn't know what I was doing. So that was the only time that he experienced anything that was a result of the war. And his motto was, think positively. He never would let us say any. If I had a headache, I wouldn't tell him because he didn't want to hear. He didn't want to hear anything bad.
wow.
And that's how I grew up. And I think my children are the same way now. They rarely talk about anything that's negative. And I feel very privileged to have learned that because it's taken me a long way.
Uh-huh. All these years, my goodness. Well, I know, my father was a liberator of a camp during the war, and he never spoke about it until I started working uh, dealing with anti-Semitism and neo-Nazis. And it was partly a protection of me that he shared what he had done and all his letters that he'd written that he'd hidden away in a closet. So I totally understand that he didn't want to see these pictures. But some of them, like the one of, wasn't it of Eisenhower?
Eisenhower,
Yeah.
General Patton, and General, I'm having a moment, Patton, Eisenhower, and
And President FDR.
Franklin Roosevelt, yes.
Yeah.
That was the only, from what I understand, that was the only picture of the 3 of them together. So it became a unique picture. And my son Ken somehow had it printed in whatever newspaper. I never did find out which one. And it seemed to go all around the world. The people thought it was so unusual. And that led to my becoming a not reporter, I guess it's a reporter of my life, which to me is so unusual that anybody is interested in my life.
Oh no.
But
Again,
it has been an interesting life.
I bet it has. You have seen so many famous people. I love the idea that you got to hear Frank Sinatra, was it?
Several times in person, yes. Yes, at
Yeah.
least 3 or 4 times.
Oh,
Because Jerry loved Frank Sinatra as much as I did. But the first time I heard Frank sing was at the Hotel Astor roof when there was a Hotel Astor. And during his performance, he says, I have an announcement to make. My wife and I just had a baby girl, and she's going to be called Nancy. And so that made it even more famous. And then one night when he had a bad time for a spell in his early career, and he was appearing in, I don't know what restaurant it was in New York. My parents had taken me to this restaurant for dinner, and he was singing songs, and he was standing right behind my mother singing and looking at me. But I mean, it was just the way he presented himself. And my mother, who was not into our kind of music, she liked Victor Herbert. My mother said, "He'll never amount to anything." So I said, I, when he became really famous, I told my mother, I said, "I think you were wrong on this one."
Oh, I love it. I love it. Oh, my goodness. You talked about belonging to a synagogue in New York.
In Forest Hills.
What was?
In Forest Hills, where I lived, that's
Okay.
before I was married. We were a part of the conservative temple in Forest Hills. And he had the rabbi was Rabbi Ben Zion. All of a sudden, his last name escaped from Boxer. Rabbi Ben Zion Boxer was the rabbi for many years. And then he passed away, I think, early in life. And then when we moved here, I became a member of the Reformed Temple, because I wanted Rick, my oldest son, was a year away from being bar mitzvah, and I called up the conservative temple to find out how much the seats were at the high holy days, and they said, "Oh well, we really don't have room in the real auditorium. You can get the basement, I think, was so much dollars, and if you went into another room, it was a little more money." And I said, "Thank you very much." And the man who was the builder of the area that I live in was also a friend of ours, and he said, you have to join Temple Israel. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful building, and the rabbi is very nice. So I said, "Well, I'll try it." We bought tickets for the High Holy Days, and we were very impressed with the Rabbi Zion. And so I joined, and it was a new experience because I had never been in a Reform synagogue before, but it was really a wonderful experience, and we stayed. I'm still a member there, but the demographics of this area have changed a great deal. So it's not the kind of a temple. Well, first of all, I have a problem with my balance. I have a caregiver here because they told me I can't walk. I know I can't walk alone because just before it became worse, and I'd walk down the street and I'd say to myself, the people behind you must think you're drunk, because that's how I was walking.
Oh, yeah.
But so I rarely go to temple now because I don't like to impose upon people. I can't drive anymore.
Yeah.
So I have a grandson who takes me to dinner, or he brings dinner in. We have dinner on Friday night, and then we go to temple. In fact, that's what we'll be doing tomorrow night.
Wonderful. You're very lucky to have family around.
I am. Yes, I'm very lucky. I have a beautiful family. In fact, one of my grandsons and my oldest son and I and my grandson's 3 children and a wife were on a cruise last week at this time.
Oh.
And we had a wonderful time. I love being with the family, with my grandchildren, and I have 4 great-grandchildren. So I'm very, very lucky and fortunate for what I have.
Yes, indeed. My goodness. And you still have all these great photos and memories of decades. And it says you've had house guests, and including a former president.
Oh, they're talking about Donald Trump.
Oh, my goodness.
Donald and my oldest son, Rick, were in the same class in a private school, and they became friends. And Rick invited Donald to come over one Saturday for a play date. They were about 10 years old. So he came over, and the play, I don't even remember what they were doing, but he was still at the house for lunch. So I made a tuna fish or an egg salad or some kind of a salad on white bread. And they sat down at the table, and I put the plate with the sandwich on it in front of Donald. And he lifted up the top white bread, the slice, and he looks at what's underneath it, and he says to me, "Mrs. Franklin, I like my tomatoes sliced thinly." So I said, "I'll try to remember that, Donald, for the next time you're here." But he never came back. So I didn't have to wait. But that was the famous story that went around when he was running and became president, about Donald and the sliced tomato.
Oh my goodness. 10 years old, huh?
Yes.
Oh goodness. From the mouths of babes. So, of all of these wonderful memories and photos, what is your favorite photo and person in it?
Many pictures that were photos of Jerry. Those are the pictures that are favorite for me. I've had hockey players, well-known hockey players at the time, here for Sunday brunch. I've had Rocky Graciano, who was a well-known boxer. We he was a guest of ours many times for one of the boys' bar mitzvahs, and he would come over to the house sometimes when we were having people over, and sometimes just pick himself up and come to the house. And the funniest thing that ever happened was I had a car that part of the tire that was a part of the tire, not the tire itself, but it flown off one day when I was driving, and I never bothered. It wasn't necessary, and I never bothered to have it repaired. So the car was parked in the driveway, and Rocky pulls up, and he notices the car. And says, "What happened?" And I said, "Oh, it flew off one day, and I never bothered to have it replaced." He said, "I'll take care of it." He had a rented car at the time, and it was the same color as my car. And I said, "What are you doing, Rocky?" He says, "Oh, well, I'll take it off of my car." And I said, "You can't, that's not your car." "Oh," he says, "I'll never notice it." So that's what he did. Took my tire off and replaced it with the tire from his car.
From the rental.
He was a real character. One time I threatened to put him out of the house if it didn't clean up his act in the house, because he was very good with 4-letter words.
Oh, dear.
Interesting people.
I love it. I love it. Oh my goodness. Well, one of the things I've always said about women is that we are like the glue of society, because we remember these things. We have participated as mothers, grandmothers, daughters, and we can pull it all together just as you do. And so I'm giving you an official title, Glue of Society. You hold us together with these great stories and wonderful pictures that we have in our minds now. And is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't talked about?
I, I mentioned it, Jerry and his positivity, and that has become my motto also. And not only that, but as women, older women, we have to not sit in the house and bemoan the fact that we're old and we can't walk or we can't. There's always something. You can read a book, you can sew, you can crochet. There's always something that you can do to take up your time and be pleased with what you're doing and not sitting around and bemoaning the fact that you don't have the ability to do the things that you can't do. And that's how I feel about why I'm doing these interviews, is that possibly if I impress one woman to take me up on that, I think I've accomplished something. And I hope that every woman will try and do that when they're not feeling up all the time. Find something to do to improve your life.
Hear, hear. Oh, I love it. Thank you. I'm taking notes. And
Thank you very much for having me. And I really enjoy speaking with you.
totally my pleasure. It's wonderful. And audience, I know you're going to not only enjoy this, but Bea has given you homework here. And let us persevere. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.